that's actually one of the things that I love the most about Modacity is it provides like a practice room in your pocket that is a very stimulating, anchoring practice room. It's a practice environment.
I have had such a great time getting to know today's guest. He is one of my favorite people, such an interesting person, and it's his second time on the show. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations. We're talking today with Marc Gelfo, who is the founder of Modacity, and you've been hearing me talk about Modacity ever since 2018 if you've been listening to the podcast. I love it to death. They're a sponsor of the podcast right now, by the way, but I just love chatting with Marc. I think he's such an interesting person. We have a lot of shared history, and I'll link up to our first episode, which we did here on the streets of San Francisco. I discovered Modacity and then started looking up things about them and realized that they were working at the time right on the street that I live on in San Francisco. So I've had great times getting to know Marc and using this app, and Modacity, the app, really got me back into practicing. So we talk about what Marc has been up to for the last couple of years since I had him on the show, deliberate practice, which is what he's all about and this app is all about, new features coming from Modacity, this new iPad edition that just came out, and much more. Again, thank you to Modacity for sponsoring this episode, and thank you also to our sponsors, Dorico, Trumpet Labs. And without further ado, here is round 2 with Marc Gelfo. So the last time, Marc Gelfo, that I actually had you on the podcast, we were sitting on Mission Street in San Francisco, talking outside, having a beverage one afternoon. I remember there were buses going by and chatting about Modacity. I just found out about the app maybe a month before and totally gotten into it in that month. And it's been the one constant in my practice these last few years. I credit Modacity and you, I guess, too, with getting me back into practicing after a good 20 years of like practicing for the event only. So thank you for that.
Wow. With great pleasure. Thank you.
And we've hung out a bunch over the years in between. So and tried to do a podcast during a Golden Gate Base Camp and just ran out of time. Mm-hmm. We were going to do one in a limo or something like that, if I remember right. But so it's nice to connect across the country, but connect again for the show. And you've been up to a lot in the interceding time, if that's the right word. And Modacity continues to be something I use every day. And you've got this iPad version out now,
iPad's
which I've been using the last week.
Oh, you've been using the iPad already?
I've been using the beta version and really digging that. So thank you for that. And yeah, what's new in your life? What's new with Modacity? There are so many things we could talk about, but yeah, what are some Marc Gelfo and Modacity updates you'd like
Absolutely.
to share?
Well, happy Earth Day to everybody listening. We're recording this on Earth Day, and that's part of what's alive for me this year is that I've studied regenerative design, and I'm really stoked to apply that to music practice. So when I was building Modacity, I was coming from a place of more the classical music mindset of like, all right, we're going to build skills, but not thinking about the ecosystem of how practice influences everything else that you do and how we as humans influence each other and influence the planet with all of our choices. So we might want to get into that at some point.
That'd be great.
I think that the pandemic times have shifted the plans and goals of nearly everybody, and we've all been affected in positive and negative ways. So for me, the pandemic actually cemented a very deep trust and a little bit more go with the flow, Taoist practice for real. Because I had a lot of plans for that year. I was going to go to Israel and Bali and do the digital nomad thing, and absolutely did not. But at the same time, the way that it unfolded reinforced some trust for me in the greater flow of things and in the importance of the challenges that we all face to really integrate the challenges and alchemize them and turn them into gold. And in fact, something I just read was a study called Carrot and Stick in Motor Learning. And it's a 2015 study. Carrot and stick, it's like punishment and reward. Sure. And these guys were really interested in salsa dancing, these researchers. And they said, well, if you're dancing salsa and you screw up the step, will you learn faster if your partner goes wrong and gives you a little poke? Or if they forgive you, or what? How do reward and punishment work in practice? And in motor learning in particular. And what they found was that reward helps retention. So you want to give yourself a reward when you do something right. Makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. And punishment helps to create adaptation. So punishment doesn't help if you're trying to, improve retention. But if you're trying to make changes, a little bit of punishment and negative emotion will catalyze the adaptation for the body. In the same way that when something is really painful, you're like, oh, never again. Right? So tying that back to this pandemic times and what I've been up to, I think we've all experienced various forms of constriction or punishment, if you will, from the way that reality has unfolded. And now it's aiding an adaptive period. And there's so much adaptation and learning to be had from that time. So I'm really, really juiced to integrate all of those learnings and start creating a new paradigm.
Well, I had fun following along with your journey. I felt, like many people, trapped this last year and change. And I've haven't left, like I was telling you before we hit record, I haven't left the city of San Francisco in over a year, which is bizarre. And if you have to pick a city to get trapped in, you could do worse than San Francisco, but still. And I've lived vicariously through you, watching your travels in Costa Rica and realizing, wow, there is another life besides sitting trapped in my place. But one pandemic project, and I know lots of people have had them, involving Modacity for me this last year, was I discovered this series of 16 books called Incredibly Useful Exercises for the Double Bass by a bassist named Dennis Whitaker, bass professor at the University of Houston and principal bass of the Houston Grand Opera, and really, really mindful about how he frames the practice, starting with intentions and really setting your mind, and just everything about it is mindful practice. And I thought, I know something else in my life that is all about mindful practice. And so I had 16 straight weeks of building out each one of these volumes in Modacity and working through simultaneously the Incredibly Useful Exercise volume in Modacity. And I even filmed them all with my iPad having the Incredibly Useful Exercises and my iPhone having the Modacity playlist. And so I went through and used those, and just another example of how, and I just felt like what you have built with this app was just so perfectly tied into that kind of practice. And it was a great I kind of want to redo the 16 weeks because I think that was about the most positive I felt about my bass playing this last year, was working through that. I felt like I was really making gains, and Dennis's whole approach is focusing on some element of your playing, but not just technical. Sometimes it's technical, like left hand low position development. Sometimes it's flow and emotion and that sort of thing. So it was a really interesting 16-week kind of prism at all the aspects of musicianship. And I just really had fun going through that with Modacity as my companion.
Well, it sounds like a very holistic approach to building your musicianship and building your skill. And when you combine a holistic approach that covers all the different bases with a way of practicing that is, say, energy positive, in that it's not emotionally draining, it's not frantic, it's not decentered or unregulated, then you get the opportunity to make immense progress very quickly. And it's progress that is, like you said, there's this prism or full spectrum. It's like you're getting all the nutrients that you need on a balanced diet. And then the organism of your musicianship grows and flourishes. And yeah, you can just keep going on and on and on, because what happens when the organism of your musicianship is flourishing is that inevitably it comes into contact with others' musicianship, and you get to record music and share music or provide feedback on the way other people are playing, and you're doing so from a very evolved place. And it's super cool. You're actually raising the entire music world when you do work like that.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. I love that.
Yeah.
It's been fun. I've talked about Modacity and endlessly on the podcast and at events and that sort of thing. But like some of the things that just what you've built with that sort of set me right, rather than just pulling out my bass and playing, just seeing that simplicity of that interface that I continue to love with the record button and the timer and just everything stripped down and in the iPad version as well. Just seeing that sort of makes me approach my bass playing with much more intention. I don't know if that makes sense, but just rather than having all these things on my mind, I just have everything dialed in right there. And I'm just seeing the passage of time, the encouragement to listen and reflect on my own playing, and then just the other subtle interfaces that are in there depending on what you're doing with it. I just find that I see that purple app, and it just actually the color, it just puts me in the right headspace, I think, or a much more positive headspace to
Modacity purple, totally. Yeah. We there's an effect called context dependent learning, and what that says is that when you learn something inside of a context, that you will recall it better in that context as well. So, for example, if you get people to learn a list of words and the list of words is on a green page or they're in a green room, they're going to recall those words better, be able to write them down better on a green page or in a green room if they've only learned it on that green page. So what you've done is you've set up a context. It's a practice context that goes with you all the time and reminds you, and it becomes a deeper and deeper context. And that's actually one of the things that I love the most about Modacity, is that it provides like a practice room in your pocket that is a very stimulating, anchoring practice room. It's a practice environment. And in addition to context dependence, for example, which would predict that if you only practice your scales when you have the purple Modacity screen in front of you, there's also context independence, which is saying that, well, you probably want to close your eyes once every now and then, or like look out your window or visualize playing in a concert hall, so that you're not pairing the context of Modacity with scales so that they become dependent. But you do want to make them kind of interdependent in a sense, so that, for example, if you're playing, you should try this sometime in when you're performing a piece of music that you've practiced a lot in Modacity. Imagine that Modacity is next to you or with you, and you've got the purple there, and all of a sudden, all this stuff is going to come flooding back, all the deliberate practice improvements or your notes or whatever. It might actually trigger like quite a few networks. The context is powerful.
That's a great idea, actually, because I actually am. I mean, I've used it. I don't know exactly. I have to look at my phone how many hundreds of hours I'm into it right here. It's something like 500 something hours. I don't know if that means I practice a lot or not enough, but so anyway, yeah, over 500 at this point, but I'm so used to seeing that purple that I definitely got into this routine after we chatted on Mission Street, though, a few years ago, but I got into this great rhythm after I got a piece to the point where I was getting through it, but I was, there were fuzzy moments, out of focus moments. I really enjoyed this routine of working on it in Modacity. Then at the end of my practice session, or near the end, recording in Modacity, a complete run through, and then just very objectively, I would just sit down. Sometimes I go outside and sit down on a bench. Sometimes I just sit down in my place, listening back, and I would just in the check boxes. What is that the notes option there?
Yeah.
I would just write down the measure and what I needed to work on. And I would just write down that, and then I would close up the app and I'd be done for the day. And the next day I'd pull it out.
Yeah, you pull it up, the notes are right there.
There was my list of everything to do, and checking it off as I went through it. That was just like
so satisfying.
Well, it was such a great way to have a practice room in my pocket, just like that. And to have it all like in that one device. It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, I salute you for your expert and continued use of Modacity, because that's really what my aim was, to give people something that they use for a long time, that it's like life before you can't even go back. I personally, I can't imagine. Sometimes I, of course, practice without Modacity, and I want to enjoy it. But after a few days of playing without it, I think, oh God, I would just be so much more fun if I had my phone and Modacity going, which is tricky for a lot of people having the phone on. You know, especially now, a lot of us have screen fatigue, Zoom fatigue, you name it. Even my fingers sometimes just get sensitive from tapping on the phone. So what I'll do is I'll turn down my brightness all the way and just kind of have it like sitting or even face down. But it helps me stay organized, and I know I've got the recorder, the metronome, all the stuff there that I need if I do need it.
This episode is brought to you by Trumpet Labs. These are hand-built microphones out of Portland, Oregon, and they make an excellent mic for upright bass called Nadine. Barry Green got to try out this mic at our 2020 online bass summit, where Trumpet Labs was a sponsor, and he was singing its praises all weekend long. It's an instrument-mounted condenser mic with an incredibly clear, natural sound and great feedback rejection. It's durable and works with in-ears, monitors, you name it. Not to mention, Christian McBride, Barry Bales, and Missy Raines are all Nadine users. Whether it's classical, jazz, Americana, or bluegrass, this mic seriously delivers, and they're offering a free t-shirt, especially to Contrabass Conversations listeners, with a purchase of a mic. Just visit www.eartrumpetlabs.com/contrabass to claim yours and check out Nadine. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the features that perplexed me at first, and then I realized its brilliance, is their concept of flows. Here is Daniel Spreadbury, Senior Product Manager, on what flows are and how they work.
The ability to have multiple exercises or multiple songs or whatever, it's so obvious, because music is very rarely just one through composed bit from start to end, whether it's a show or a symphony or a sonata or a songbook or whatever. Music's in sections. That's just how it works.
That is how it works, but that's not how most music notation software works. And the ability to break things up like that, oh my goodness. When I'm creating exercises or anything of the sort for my students or any sort of project that I have going, that makes organization so much easier. Exporting is a breeze. Everything that you do in Dorico is beautiful from the get-go, which is really cool coming from other pieces of software. Check them out at Dorico.com. That'll take you to their site on Steinberg's website. And they have a free product called Dorico SE, where you can do practically everything that you can in the full version of Dorico for up to 2 parts. That's more than enough if you're doing bass duets or anything of the like. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Dorico. And for me, I learned do not disturb is my best friend on the phone. I have to remember to turn that on. Otherwise, the moment I start practicing is the moment that some stressful text message will come in, or some WeChat double bass update through my work or something like that. So I turn that on. But another thing, I love, and again, I've said this so many times over the years, but the separation of the planning from the practice session, I find so helpful in terms of getting the momentum going in my practicing, because I can't tell you how many times over the decades it's like, all right, I got to practice. What am I going to practice?
Yeah, what do I do? How long do I do it? What do I focus on?
Yeah, and maybe I'm burned out at the end of the day, and I don't really have so to plan that out when I'm fresh, when I'm in the right the headspace, for me at least, that is most conducive to intelligently planning my practicing is not necessarily the headspace that I am in when I first pull out my bass. And just for me, I tend to pull out my bass a little later in the day, maybe, than some people. That's just my life, because I have a lot of projects on my plate. if maybe you'd be different if you started practicing at 9 a.m. every day. For me, it's usually like 4 p.m., which is generally not my freshest time. And so, but the fact that I have that planning, and as soon as I get into it, I have the first thing in my Modacity playlist is just a simple little thing. It's called Tune, Rosin, Get Set. It's very simple, but it's just a little bit. And all it is really like an indication of how much time I have been chewing before I actually start doing something. So I get it going and then I look and it's like, all right, 90 seconds. We got to get going. When I was going through those incredibly useful exercises, the next thing that Dennis would have you do is 30 seconds of silence. And so in Modacity, I have that, and I need to add that back in because that's the sort of thing that I will normally just, especially if it's later in the day, I'll just like jump in. But boy, to just take that time and it's like, oh yeah, 30 seconds. And I'm just breathing 30 seconds. You know,
do you want to try an experiment right now, Jason?
Let's do it, Marc.
The experiment is for us and for our listeners to take 30 seconds of silence and see how insanely long that feels when you actually do it.
Let's do it. And podcast editors, do not put ads in right here. This is after this, please. Okay, so let's do it, Marc. You want to count us off? Or
yeah, I set a timer, so we're going to go now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
That is the only time in over 800 episodes.
It's so profound though, right? Do you feel the shift in the energy that happens? And
that's why after we get off here, I'm going to add that 30 seconds back into my routine because it's an incredible, and I should actually sprinkle that in throughout my routine.
Yes.
But I can't tell you how great it is, especially it would be good for me at 9 a.m. too, but especially when I'm pulling out my bass, just like everything about it from the purple color, which maybe seems cheesy, but I'll tell you that association is real, to like that list I've built and the routine I know. And I have this list. I have a few different lists depending on what I'm doing, but I sort of have my main list that I just call current, and I adjust that. And then every once in a while I save that and kind of archive it and make a new current list. But that list is always evolving and changing depending on the projects I'm using. I'm going through, but I have some things that have commonalities, and it's just working through those series of steps that I've thought through, and those steps do evolve over time. They have evolved. They're different than they were 4 months ago. They're different than they were a year ago, though there are some things in common. Just having that has made me just so incredibly more consistent because I see that item in Modacity and I could click away and move away, but because I see that, I'll often dip into something even for a couple minutes that I might not have. And just having that, it's like going to the gym and really being mindful about what you're doing, or you could apply that to many things in life.
And you're preventing forgetting as well. I had this experiment on the Siegfried long call, which you probably know is one of these big long horn excerpts, quite challenging. And I worked on it not very much, but I worked on it really deliberately in Modacity. This is after years of performing it and sometimes really banging my head against the wall with it. And I swear I practiced that thing for like 5-10 minutes, 6 or 7 times over a month. And each time I practiced it, I used the deliberate practice function to actually come up with a strategy that actually improved the problems. And then, as you know, the app saves those strategies and you're confronted with them the next time that you open up the practice item. And those things stuck. And like 6 months later, I was out in the woods and I found this insane acoustic. It was in one of these big national forests, and I was up on a rock, and you could play the horn and it would come back, and 2 seconds later, acoustic. And I recorded the Siegfried call. I hadn't been playing much for a couple of weeks. It's a very physically taxing thing. And I just crushed that Siegfried call, at least at my level and my standards. And it was being in Modacity and seeing the written down strategies. It primes the entire network. So all it takes is a tiny little fragment of text to activate an entire history of experiences and to reinforce those neural connections and keep them from getting pruned. Basically, what we're doing is we want to prevent forgetting. That's the name of the game. That's how you make things stick, is you prevent yourself from forgetting them. Well, how do you prevent yourself from forgetting them? You test it, you revisit it, etc. Well, it can take quite a lot of time and effort to revisit things if you're not doing it in the most efficient way. I find that having just a tiny little label that's well named for whether it's a practice item or whether it's a deliberate practice strategy, to be able to, boom, okay, primed, neuroprimed, entire 10 years of experience just got activated in my brain in 1 second. Well, you can do a lot of preventing forgetting with that, such that you maintain and can grow your skills, keep a foundation for constant growth.
Yeah, that's been a great feature for me, and I like how in that deliberate practice, the improve button, it's such a great idea that takes you to this subroutine, and you've primed the pump with some things that you might do, but I've also found it so helpful to add my own strategy, yes. And then that it's saved there. That has been incredibly useful, especially for some of these. I've been working on these pieces that have gotten better. I have a piece that uses all these double stops. It's this chorale by a wonderful composer named Nicholas Walker. I've basically been working on it since I started using Modacity. So my entire history with this piece is in Modacity, from my early attempts saved to later. And when I hit some roadblocks, and I hit some roadblocks because it does a lot of things that I just hadn't had experience in, I had some of those strategies saved, and I would get into it. And one problem I had, this is a common Jason problem, is to play way too choppy. Like I get everything, and it's like I have bits of music that are like this. And so just having primers like connect, smooth, think through the phrases, blow through the phrases, think vowels, strategies such as that I have in there. And that was the sort of thing that would just make me remember, that's what did it for me with that piece. Just trying to think more vowels would all of a sudden, it went from being, the type of playing I've been struggling with my whole life to all of a sudden a more connected piece of music.
That's awesome. What would you say are your biggest challenges in your practice now? What's the hardest thing about practicing for you these days?
Consistency. And that's another thing that I love about Modacity, is that it tracks your days. And I was on this great streak of like 60 some days. And then I missed a day, and I was like, no, that was when I was working on those incredibly useful exercises and doing every day. And I was preparing for the next video and preparing, that I find that the streak, consistency is the issue, and the big struggle. Probably the reason I'm struggling with consistency right now is I don't really have any concrete external performance goals. I don't have any gigs coming up right now.
Right.
I actually, that's a little bit not true right now, because I do finally have something on the books for, I think, May, although we don't have the date set. But as soon as that music came, my practicing got more consistent once again. I've been basically playing every day. I have yet to miss more than a couple days since using Modacity, though. And I was real inconsistent. I mean, we're talking, unless something wasn't coming up, that bass was not leaving the case or the corner.
Wow.
So, and I think part of that is just the ease at which, it's like, for me, if I don't practice for a while, it's the giant weight of what I could practice, or, oh no, I have to get back into shape, or what do I even do? Or what do I do if I've taken 2 weeks off? That sort of stuff would just build up, and I'd procrastinate. And I think having a playlist that I've already built that I had been working on, it's like if I miss a couple days, I just go back to that playlist, and maybe I just go slow, or I just work the technique, or I take an easier exercise. So that's been helpful. But just not having an external performance goal has been a little bit of a challenge.
Same for me. When I have something, even if it's a small thing, like I had the honor of playing on a friend's funeral during pandemic times, and it was one of these virtual collaborations. And so it wasn't like I had to fly somewhere and perform or do it live, but it was still a performance commitment that I had made. And my artistry just shot through the roof. All of a sudden I was back practicing intensely, because my focus has been more on the tech and entrepreneurship side these last couple of years. And I knew exactly what to do. I typed in all the stuff, and it was so having a real reason to perform is I think the ultimate nutrient in a practicer's diet, because practicing for the sake of practice, it's cool, right? Like masters do it. And I'm not quite sure how Kung Fu practitioners, for example, because they're not training because they have a fight coming up. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if there's a version of that for musicians where we're not practicing because we have a gig coming up. But in my experience, it sounds like in your experience as well, and a lot of folks I've talked to, when you've got a concrete performance commitment coming up, it makes it a lot easier to orient towards practicing. I'm curious if you have have come across any tips for folks that are wanting to create more of a steady drip or stream of performance opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, there are. It's been interesting during the pandemic to
Yeah.
I mean, there are different, like non-pandemic times and pandemic times, different ways. It's been interesting to see people just putting themselves out there, even if it's just doing like an Instagram performance a week sort of thing. You know, they're just creating some sort of schedule where you doing something in public, whether it's online or in person, just doing that, you'd be amazed how that will help to get something out. I've found it helpful for me during the pandemic. I've been doing a lot of YouTube videos of me playing a piece, and that's been a good motivation because I just my professional pride makes me want to at least play it well enough. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I don't want to sound like a complete buffoon. So that's been a good motivator. It's funny with the people who practice just for practice sake. I have had some adult students come to me over the years, and all they do is just like practice the bass for fun, and they're working on the same etudes for a few years. But I do wonder if their progress would be faster if they did have something that's like, oh no, we're playing this in public in some capacity, you know, May 25th. I wonder how that would, because when there's nothing on the books, you can keep polishing the same thing forever in a sense, and there's a beauty to that. I can always get better at the C major scale. I have yet to play a truly perfect C major scale, whatever that means. You know, I've played a joyful C major scale, but if I really get objective, I can always keep getting better. But I think that the fact that I have had a lot of deadlines in my life has made me get beyond the C major scale and broaden my horizons a little bit more. If I could be still practicing that from that same C major scale from 1994 if I hadn't had the 1,000 performances.
Totally. Big hard goals. And what's his name? Stephen Kotler from the Flow Genome Project talks a lot about going for the impossible. And what do you say? High hard goals gives you 11 to 25% more motivation when you're working. If you think about 25% more motivation is a really, really significant number. And he's tied that into depression as well, which is a huge issue in modern society. For example, there's $12 billion a year in lost costs, like lost workday costs due to depression. Wow. And there's like six to eight main causes of depression. One of them is lack of meaningful work, not being engaged in your work. And for musicians, how much meaning can you really give to mastering the C major scale when you compare it to connecting, expressing, communicating, grieving, celebrating, whatever it is that we can really do. So one of the things that I'm grappling with now that I have built a fairly successful practicing platform that's goal agnostic is how can I be a force for igniting and supporting and catalyzing musicians to really connect with a deeper purpose, practice with that fire under their butts every day with more motivation and towards something that's actually meaningful.
Well, I feel like Modacity is primed to do that in a lot of ways, just because there is that intentionality is built into it. So it'd be interesting to see if you have any what comes of that. But it's a tricky thing for sure.
Yeah, it does. I remember our designer put on the deliberate practice screen like little gray, hard to read fonts, but that say "Be mindful." Be intentional, like little subtle reminders. It is a little bit baked in there. I definitely feel like there's a next level. For example, something I've been thinking about is, as a practicer, I use drones a lot. You probably use drones as well.
Mhm.
And there is this drone tool in Modacity. Fine, it makes drones as long as you want. But I would also be delighted, for example, to play along with live drones provided by a cellist.
Mhm.
And there's cellists who need to practice their long tones, right? So it's like the output of someone else's practice can be the input to my practice, and the output of my practice can be the input to someone else's practice. In this way, we're building resilient, interdependent communities of practicers. And it's a little bit more connected in that way, rather than just like I'm using my drone, my metronome, etc. What if there's a drummer who wants to make a funk track so that I can practice my funk improvisation? If you start connecting the outputs of your practice to other people's inputs, then what you've done with your practice time is less wasted, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things that is a struggle once one leaves music school, typically, because you kind of have that input output baked in a little bit more. I remember we both went to Northwestern. I remember at Northwestern just kind of having that around. Hey, can you listen for me? Do this. Let's try this. You want to play some? Do it. Just having that. And when you're out practicing on your own, or you've got a job, and maybe that's not really, depends on the job, depends on your colleagues, maybe that isn't there. The opportunity to have some of that community aspect to practicing through a platform like Modacity, that's a cool concept.
Yeah, we have community on the list of what's coming, actually. So you kind of asked what I've been working on, in addition to the iPad app, and then just a host of data model issues that are not at all sexy, and nobody notices when you get it right, but they do notice when you get it wrong. And we are finally launching Track Your Instrument, so that you can have different profiles set up, so you can separate out your piano practice, your bass practice, etc. And then working on spaced repetition, which I'm super psyched about. And then community features are kind of the next big ideation. So if anybody listening out there wants to let us know what community features would really light you up or help you thrive as a musician, we are collecting that kind of information right now. I just want to put that out there.
And how should they reach out to? What's the best way to get that to you? Just through the app?
Yeah, we have a support at modacity.co.
Okay. Cool.
Email address, folks can email us there. Or if you download the app, there's a direct line to us in the app, which is probably a good place to go explore if you're not already a user. And then be like, yeah, well, this is cool, but what if I could get somebody to actually comment on what I just practiced? Or what if I could set up a due date on a particular practice item and have to have a recording of that due to a friend for feedback? I mean, those are kind of like mini performance obligations or commitments that are not public, but are still going to keep you accountable to showing up for your instrument, showing up for your practice in a way that creates progress.
I'm so happy that my course, Beginners Classical Bass, is out in the world on Discover Double Bass, and we've been getting some great feedback. Here's Barry Green, instructor of bass at The Ohio State University, former principal bassist of the Cincinnati Symphony, and author of The Inner Game of Music. Barry writes about the course. This wonderful, extensive course includes 14 chapters of 66 lessons, varying in length from 1 to 8 minutes each. It is so comprehensive. While it is called a beginner's course, this only means that the course begins with the parts of the instrument, including how to take the bass out of the case. However, it also takes the player through the most advanced left and right hand techniques, including shifting, pivoting, harmonics, positions up to the thumb position, tuning the bass, scales and arpeggios, as well as left hand techniques of dynamics, bow placement, articulations, including portato, staccato, and slurring. Barry, thank you so much. And folks, if you haven't checked it out, you can find it through the link in the show notes, or just visit discoverdoublebass.com/Jason Heath. Here's Marc Gelfo from Modacity on the concept of 4 triggers of flow.
Mihai Csikszentmihalyi identified these 4 triggers of flow. They are complete concentration in the present moment, immediate feedback, clear goals, and the challenge skills ratio. What that means in your practicing is that you should perform something record yourself, be completely concentrated performing it in the present moment so you don't need to analyze it, then listen back. When you listen back, you'll get immediate feedback, at which point you can set a clear goal. And that clear goal should be set such that it's challenging enough that your current skills will allow you to reach it. At that point, you perform with that challenge in mind, complete concentration in the present moment. You listen back, you get immediate feedback, and you set another clear goal. So that cycle of concentration, feedback, clear goals, and making sure the challenge skills ratio is intact for your practice is the recipe for staying in flow and really making a lot of progress.
You can learn more about my favorite practice app and get a special deal on lifetime membership by visiting modacity.co/CBC. And thank you, Modacity, for sponsoring the podcast. Well, and that's one of the things I think is great about having something that is more of a practice platform rather than something like an Instagram practice channel, which I also think can be a great thing. And it's cool to see, especially people like a generation younger than me. It seems like that's very common to have an Instagram practice channel and you put something out in public and you hold yourself accountable, and that's great. But there's a danger to that too, which is everybody's great participation trophy, rah rah, sort of like go team kind of thing, which is beautiful. But it might not necessarily address things that you're actually struggling with. That might be the sort of thing that you might not be so comfortable with dealing with on a platform like Instagram. I've actually been chatting about that on the podcast with a couple of people. And so to have something that is really more about we are working to get better at this these specific goals, and let me partner with somebody, and we're not necessarily going to broadcast it publicly. I guess you could if you wanted to, but you are likely to get a different type of feedback than if it's comments on a publicly available Instagram video. Just my thoughts.
Definitely. Yeah. There's a lot of posturing and hiding and image management that goes on that's just associated with Instagram and any kind of public appearance. I was reflecting the other day in another interview that I was giving. They asked me about a turning point in my career, and it was when I was at Indiana University, and I had just dropped out of school to take the Macau Orchestra trial. I dropped out of school. I flew to Macau. I spent a month playing in the orchestra. Colleagues loved it. I took the audition, and I was so racked with nerves in the audition that I fell all over it and complete wipeout. And they said, basically, we're sorry. You played great in the orchestra. Thank you for dropping out of school so you could come to the trial, but we can't hire you on the basis of this audition. And I flew back to Indiana with my tail between my legs, and Jeff Nelson had just been hired professor. Even though I wasn't enrolled, he kind of took me under his wing. And what happened was he created one of the first true safe spaces for me to fail in pursuit of musical expression. So I don't care if you miss every note in the book. You've got to go for it with all of your heart, all of your soul. Play what it feels like to you. And at first I was completely frozen because I was so consumed thinking about technical correctness and not wanting to make a mistake. And so that safe space started to loosen the chains on my ability to perform committed to emotional connection and musical connection. And through that work and other practices as well, to dismantle stage fright, regulate myself, I was able to go back to Macau, do another trial, play the audition, and win the job. And then that started my career playing in orchestras. But this idea of a safe space where you can make all the errors sound as horrible as necessary in pursuit of some kind of truth or growth or learning or whatever. It's important that we give that to ourselves, but to give it to another person is really a special thing. So I want to see more of that in our online communities.
What about this spaced repetition element that you're adding? How's that going to work? I'm curious. Or can you share?
Yeah, I mean, we all know the premise of spaced repetition. We already talked about preventing forgetting. There's an optimal curve to prevent forgetting. When something is new, you want to revisit it later that day or the next day. Once you've gotten it to 2-3 stars of mastery, it's cool to revisit it every couple days. Once something's completely mastered, you don't really need to revisit it, but every 20 to 50 days, for example. And so you can fit a lot more material into your practice session if you're using this algorithm to predict what needs to be surfaced at the right time. It looks like studies show about double, so about 200%, the same amount. 200% learning is available to you if you use spaced repetition versus if you're not using spaced repetition. And so for someone like you, you would have a practice list set up called repertoire that has all the solos, all the stuff that you've played with the star ratings on them. And what we're going to do is just decay those star ratings when you don't practice it. So all of a sudden you're going to get a warning saying that this etude or this piece has gone from 5 stars down to 4 stars. Maybe it's time to practice it.
Nice.
And that's kind of the simplest version of retrofitting spaced repetition into what we've got. We're building the dynamic practice lists. They're actually coming out in the iPad version. We've made a little bit more dynamicism in the practice list, so they auto update based on last practice and star rating and stuff like that. But yeah, the star rating decay is going to be a really fun dynamic.
I can't wait. I can't wait to check that out. It's what a cool idea, but and what a useful addition. The whole practice list concept, while I guess it feels like kind of an obvious thing when you think about it. Just when you actually use it, it's incredible just to take me through. And I can't wait to see the dynamic integration like that. That's wild.
Yeah, if your brain, I think, works a lot like mine, and for a long time, when I was working on, for example, excerpts, I would have like index cards or something, one index card per excerpt, or a paper per excerpt, and I would take notes on it. Maybe I'd shuffle them. Maybe I'd put them in order of when I wanted to practice them. But I couldn't, for example, just duplicate Ein Heldenleben 3 times and decide to interleave it with Shostakovich 5, and then decide, well, actually, I want to put Brandenburg in there first and move things around. So being able to do that digitally gives you this very fast, flexible canvas for planning your practice sessions that has been so valuable to me. It sounds like it has for you too.
And that whole the elimination or reduction or mitigation of issues of stage fright, just how that is baked into the app into the interface, which is there's that record button encouraging you to just play, be in the moment, play. Don't be judging yourself in the moment, play. At record, listen back, and just separating the evaluation from the performance, because that is, and we've talked about this certainly before, but that is such a key factor in why one has stage fright. Right? I may be simplifying it, but playing and judging yourself as you're thinking about it in the moment is, that is. To me, at least, that seems like that's one of the core issues with when you get into that stage fright kind of cycle.
You're right. It's that forebrain. It's the logical, egoic, verbal, judging brain that interferes in a number of ways. One of my favorite life-saving books is called Choke. Do you know that book by Sion Baylock?
No, I'm writing this down.
Good.
Okay, I'll check it out.
It's called Choke, not the Chuck Palahniuk novel.
I have read that one, but
different book. This is by Dr. Sion, Sian Baylock. I can send you the stuff. And it's basically a study of why we choke in athletics and music and business. And the TLDR version of it is that we choke when we interfere with the mechanisms of learning. So the mechanisms of performance, excuse me. So meaning if you've already automated your C major scale in your fingers or your golf swing, you've gotten really good. And all of a sudden you think when it's time to swing in a very important part, wait, how do I manage my hips, or what do I do with my pinky finger on this shift? Then that conscious interference is going to mess with something that is unconsciously competent, and it's going to make it consciously incompetent. And that's what happens when you choke. And so there's training strategies that can limit this. A really, really interesting, very new research on learning motor skills in a way that you don't actually know what's happening. So there's an instructed approach where you're saying, all right, well, take your pinky finger and make sure you move it up this way. And then there's a sort of an indirect or uninstructed approach where you don't actually know what you're doing to make it happen. And it turns out that if you have an instructed training session, you can definitely choke. But if you learn it the other way, where you don't actually know what you're doing, it's impossible to choke. You can't interfere with it. So it's weird. And I'm not quite sure what to make of that yet, because of course I'm all about deliberate practice and naming strategies that work and intellectualizing them. It seems there's like a very important place for just letting the body figure it out and not, I don't even know. I don't even need to know. Don't tell me, body. I don't want to know. I don't want to interfere. And just keep your head out of it.
It reminds me a bit of, I don't know if you've ever checked out we're giving people book recommendations now, but if you've ever checked out Victor Wooten's book, The Music Lesson. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Which to have that book, if you just watch a bunch of Victor Wooten videos of him playing and nothing else, to have that book come out of someone who's doing all this slap bass stuff, you might not expect that to happen, but just it's really, it's such a mind bender on just challenging the assumptions of learning. I guess that might be a simplified way of putting it, but it really made me think deeply. Barry Green, the author of The Inner Game of Music, he was the one who recommended that book to me, and that was one of those books. I remember where I was when I was reading The Music Lesson, and it really made me think a bit differently about my own practicing and certainly working with students.
It's a game changer.
Yeah.
For me, the Music Lesson in audiobook form, where he's actually playing bass on it, I've listened to it probably 3 times straight.
Wow.
And that and The Inner Game of Tennis, the original, were some of the biggest game-changing books for my practice. Yeah. The book club. We should start the Deliberate Practice Book Club.
That would be a great idea, actually, for sure. Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm a fan of everything you do, Marc, and you and Modacity. It's the only app that has really had staying power where I actually use it all the time. I guess I use Foursquare all the time just because of the convenience, but I use paper music when the occasion requires, and I still have Modacity right there on the stand. So it has definitely become my practice room in my pocket for sure. And I'm super excited to hear of the new developments, and I've been having a great time using it on my iPad and using it in the various modes, full screen and split screen on the iPad and all that kind of thing. And so it works great. I love the drones on the iPad. I got the iPad Pro with the big loudspeakers. So yeah, it's great. And I look forward to everything that you've done with this app, and just look forward to seeing Modacity continue to evolve going forward.
Yeah, me too. And thank you for being such a power user. It's been amazing to watch you adopt it and use it like that.
I'm a huge fan. I know there are different ways that people can get into the Modacity ecosystem. Just let folks know what to do next if they want to get into this Modacity world we're talking about.
Totally. Yeah. If you're the kind of person that resonates with organizing your practice and taking a little bit more structured approach, or letting an app take care of that structured approach for you, Modacity right now is available for iOS. So you can just go to the App Store and search Modacity, or we actually have a special page set up for Contrabass Conversations, right?
Yep.
That's modacity.co/
Contrabass Conversations.
/Contrabass Conversations.
I'm almost 100% sure I will link up to that. I think I've typed that enough that should be what it is.
Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
No, but at this point, I think I owe you a modacity.co/bassgod. So maybe we could set one up there too.
That'll also work.
Yeah.
Marc, thank you. And like we said, modacity.co/CBC will hook you up with a lifetime subscription and a discount on that. And I love it. It is, like I said in this episode, it's probably obvious, it got me back into practicing. It's one of the things that I use every day. That purple app just makes me think practice time. And so, yeah, very cool. Hope you enjoyed this. Maybe it's your first episode. Maybe it is number, what is this? It's 801, I think, if I'm remembering right. Wow, we're into the 800s. Crazy, but the more I do this, the more I realize there are so many people to connect with. Even if I never talk to anybody a second time, I'll never run out of people to talk to, and I love having people back 2 times, like with Marc, 3 times, 4 times, many, many times. Such a fun thing. And it's one of those things, doing this podcast, that I like it. I love chatting with people. There's a lot of work surrounding it, busy work and more deep work, but there's just a lot surrounding it besides the conversations. And sometimes I get overwhelmed and I think, the podcast. But then when I actually do these conversations, I get a lot out of it, and it's fun for me to do personally, and that it goes out into the world, that people actually connect with it and listen to it and give me recommendations. That is just so cool. And every once in a while, I get really busy and I don't do any proactive reaching out to people, and the podcast, the episodes in the can start to dwindle, and I think, oh no, I'm almost out of episodes. But then what always happens is then there's like a wave of new people coming, and that just happened this past week. I was running low, and I've got a lot of things coming up this summer, so I was getting a little stressed, and like, I got to reach out to people or whatever. And then all of a sudden, it's like the universe got some message that I was sending out, and all of these things got booked. So I've got another huge round of interviews coming up, and so I'm going to be a little busier with that. But that's also my favorite thing to do, is to actually chat with people and connect with people. So I will stop babbling and thank the team that puts these episodes together. Thank you to Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.